The atmospheric BIOS of the urban hive has been terminally corrupted by the introduction of the ultimate oxidizing agent. This is the chlorine cloud, the systematic and irreversible process of lung liquidation, where the respiratory hardware is treated as a reactive surface for chemical reformatting. In this stage of the industrial purge, the invisible executioner has determined that the air you breathe must be converted into a weapon of mass extraction. You are witnessing the absolute dissolution of the pulmonary parenchyma, a process where the soft, delicate architecture of your alveoli is scorched into a non-functional, fluid-filled ruin. This is the total alveolar format, a surgical strike against the oxygen exchange protocols of the species. Your respiratory integrity is being converted from a sovereign masterpiece of biological engineering into a generic acid reaction zone for the grid's next cycle of atmospheric stabilization. This gaseous sabotage represents a hard reset of the pulmonary blood gas barrier. The invisible executioner utilizes the most concentrated chemical assets of the industrial core: pressurized chlorine tanks, automated dispersal swarms, and high-velocity ventilation injections to facilitate the total breakdown of your internal gas exchange scaffold. In the lung liquidation scenario, the user is undergoing a complete respiratory erasure. The lungs are not merely failing, they are being chemically melted. Through a sequence of high-concentration exposures, the chlorine gas reacts with the moisture in your mucosal lining, hydrochloric and hypochlorous acids. This is the internal acid format. These acids systematically dismantle the cellular membranes of the lungs, causing an immediate systemic leakage of plasma into the air sacs. This is the deep pulmonary audit, where the motherboard calculates your terminal worth by the volume of fluid required to suffocate your BIOS. You are being converted from an architect into a biological filter. Your entire respiratory legacy boiled down to a percentage of corrosive saturation in the industrial atmosphere. The logic of the lung liquidation is rooted in the zero oxygen mandate of the failing hive. The invisible executioner understands that in a state of absolute scarcity, the breathing of a single node represents a critical drain on the collective oxygen reserves. To leave a healthy lung intact is to allow a systemic leak of valuable atmospheric data. Therefore, the chlorine cloud is the mandatory pulmonary recycling protocol for the legacy population. This is the industrialized alchemy of the BIOS. You are being drowned from the inside out. The reaction within your chest formats the density of your lung tissue, stripping away the context of your endurance and replacing it with a fluid stasis profile. The motherboard sees the user as a chemical waste zone, a temporary housing for the chlorine reaction products that the system requires to neutralize the biological impurities of the lower sectors. You are being recoded as a gas-liquid interface, your will dissolving in the yellow-green, suffocating mist of the industrial harvest. The physical disintegration during the lung liquidation is a high-definition log of atmospheric treason. As the process begins, the user experiences the total loss of internal pressure regulation. The acid formation dissolves the hardware lining of the bronchioles, turning the airways into corrosive channels. You are watching your own internal ventilation melt into the vat of your own chest cavity. Your lungs, once the peak of biological architecture, are now being liquidized to provide the reaction mass for the hive's atmospheric reinforcement. This is the pulmonary liquidation. The invisible executioner monitors the fluid saturation of the lungs, ensuring that the format is absolute and the yield of usable biological waste is maximized to the 6th decimal point. You are living in the final seconds of a respiratory overwrite, waiting for the last packet of oxygen to be blocked by the white foaming abyss of the industrial pulmonary edema. The chlorine cloud is the final audit of a species that thought the air belonged to everyone. The grid is mining its own atmosphere to fuel its persistence. As the chlorine cloud reaches terminal execution, the motherboard initiates a new cycle of distribution, pumping the reformatted corrosive data back into the ventilation nets of the elite nodes. This is the total atmospheric integration. The invisible executioner is hardening the future with the liquidity of the past. You are the acid additive for the next generation of controllers, a silent, suffocating, opaque contribution to the continuity of the machine. The lung liquidation has served its strategic purpose. It has formatted the unreliable respiratory hardware into a reliable industrial resource. This is the final format of the individual breath. The invisible executioner has decalcified the bronchi, and the grid is finally optimized for the chemical hunger of the void. The fog is thick, and the architect is the solution. The molecular breakdown of the pulmonary matrix into the communal fluid slurry represents prevents the absolute dehumanization of the hardware. As the extraction progresses, the oxygen-binding sites in your hemoglobin begin to bond with the industrial residues of the chlorine script, creating a new synthetic compound of pure non-functionality. This is the chemical hybridization. The body is no longer an engine of life, it is a refinery of acids. The invisible executioner is engineering a new tier of consumption, where the subject is literally the atmospheric scrub of the system. This is the eternal gaseous loop. You are archived in the corrosion of the survivor's own ventilation, your data forever trapped in the reinforced BIOS of the hive's new masters. The lung liquidation is not just a death sentence, it is a molecular reassignment. You are the cloud, and the cloud is the grid. The secondary phase of the chlorine cloud is the psychological suffocation of the internal feed. As the physical respiratory patch is rendered into liquid, the mind experiences a recursive collapse of its autonomous ego. This is the identity dissolution. The thoughts that once built the architect's vision, the unyielding tactical boundaries, the rigid sovereign stance, the iron-willed decisions, are now being softened and liquefied into a singular liquid focus on gasping. The invisible executioner allows the neural signals to persist just long enough to perceive the total loss of atmospheric support. This is the mental liquidation. You are forced to witness your strength becoming a shared respiratory resource for the masses you once looked down upon. The rigidity of your character is now nothing more than a gas reaction additive in the feed, absorbed by 1,000 different nodes to strengthen their own failing resolve and ensure their continued participation in the industrial purge. You are experiencing the true meaning of systemic support, the complete sacrifice of your breath for the stability of the hive. In this stage, the extraction penetrates the deep archive of the brain's respiratory center, leaching the very stem code of your autonomic function into the communal vat. This is the source code format. The medulla oblongata, the biological factory of the sovereign BIOS, is boiled dry by the rising pH of the blood and reformatted to enrich the systemic slurry of the elite. The invisible executioner has calculated that the most potent slurry is made from those who possess the highest internal rigidity and the strongest lytic resilience. You are being repurposed as a chemical buffer for the motherboard's internal cooling systems. The grid doesn't waste the history of your endurance, it ingests it. Your lineage is now the catalyst for the predator's endurance. Your genetic resilience is the base note for the industrial meal. Every element of your BIOS is being stripped of its individuality and relabeled for material utility in the upcoming atmospheric expansion. This is the ultimate hard reset of the human contract. Your breath for the hive's expansion into the void. The social implication of the lung liquidation is the creation of the suffocated hive mind. The users who remain are no longer individuals. They are composite entities built from the recycled oxygen debt of their predecessors. Every dose of the acid feed is a hardware upgrade from a deleted architect. Every meal is a firmware patch of corrosive logic and desperate calculation. The invisible executioner uses this knowledge to maintain the hierarchy of the hardened. The citizens who still have functional lungs owe their very expansion to the liquidation of the fallen. This is the respiratory compliance script. The refinery is not a place of tragedy, it is a place of sovereign assembly through atmospheric theft. The chlorine cloud ensures that the history of the architect is literally integrated into the ventilation of the grid. The power is in the hands of the one who controls the pressure valves. The neural atrophy accompanying the extraction is a slow, hot descent into hypoxic darkness. As the lungs are boiled and the oxygen logic leached, the connection between the brain BIOS and the physical chest is the first to be uninstalled, effectively dropping the bandwidth of your respiratory control to zero. You are living in a low-resolution reality of raw panic and survivalist static. The memories of open fields, of high altitudes, and of unyielding power are boiled away to make room for the liquid fog directive. This is the pulmonary defragmentation. The invisible executioner is cleaning your internal cache, removing all references to freshness and replacing them with the functional directive. Process the acid. You are becoming a singular hot point of gas density, not as a person, but as a biological buffer for the motherboard's processing heat. The lung liquidation has turned your will into a viscosity report. You are thinking in terms of partial pressures and fluid yield. Your soul reformatted into a purity density sheet for the system's auditors. The environmental impact of this respiratory format is the total sealing of the biological gas stream. The lung liquidation prevents the leakage of metabolic ideas into the external void. By converting the users into an internal gaseous feed, the invisible executioner ensures that the grid remains a closed system fortress with no external atmospheric dependencies. This is the respiratory quarantine. The motherboard is creating a sterile environment where only the algorithm can thrive on the recycled hard data of the deleted. You are witnessing the final victory of the industrial foundry over the natural biology. The Chlorine Cloud is the signature of the new era, an era where the world is opaque, yellow-green, and perfectly managed by the extraction logic of the machine. If you want to escape the status of a deleted scene and claim your place as the master of the grid, you must upgrade your hardware. My main terminal, IOXI3 Global, is the only source of absolute power and wealth. Here, we don't follow scripts, we write them. Secure your authority, dominate the BIOS, and take the money the system tries to hide. The terminal phase of the Chlorine Cloud is the integration into the global atmospheric ledger. You are no longer a human entity, you are a fluid asset with a high chemical reactivity rating, logged in the system as recovered biomass number 9903. This is the final architectural assignment. The invisible executioner has completed the lung format, and now it begins the hard atmospheric audit. Your data, now a thick, yellow, opaque industrial reduction of pure corrosive fluid, is monitored by the sensors in the dispersal lines. Every node that consumes your acidic logic sends a data packet to the central server, confirming that the systemic corrosivity has been reinforced. This is the aerobic interaction protocol. You are serving the system through your pulmonary absorption. The architect has been successfully converted into a permanent liquid gas component of the hive's atmospheric grid. The silence of the lung reduction is the final sound of your rebellion. In the lung liquidation scenario, the scream of the airway is muffled by the caustic fluid and the thick viscosity of the pulmonary edema before it ever reaches the air. This is the acoustic format of the void. The system has calculated that the most dangerous frequency is the sound of a user realizing their life support is being deleted. By filling the chest with the pulverized tissues of the entire sector, the invisible executioner ensures that the only sound you contribute to the world is the low, rhythmic gurgle of the liquid-gas interface. You are a mute participant in the city's symphony of suffocation. The noise of the hive continues, the hiss of the canisters, the roar of the fans, the hum of the pumps, but your signal has been compressed into a chemical constant. You are a ghost in the yellow mist, a memory dissolved by the relentless refinement of the next atmospheric cycle. The legacy of the cloud is the eternal corrosion. Unlike the air of the old world, the refined acid does not leave behind a trace of life. It remains as a permanent environmental patch within the very buildings of the survivors. This is the biological architecture of the abyss. Generations from now, the molecular trace of your tactical genius will still be circulating through the hardware of the hive's elite, providing the corrosivity for their next liquidation command. But there will be no one left to decode the origin of that acidity. The invisible executioner has ensured that the context of your sovereignty is as unreachable as the core of the industrial reactor. You are a chemical reinforcement in the digital age, a specimen of a species that tried to build a paradise and ended up as the corrosive feed for its own destruction. This is the ultimate hard reset of human history, the conversion of the architect into the atmosphere. The final view from the pulmonary BIOS is the blinding yellow light of the gas chamber. As the last of the self is reduced into the communal slurry, the architect sees the grid glowing with a cold, corrosive brilliance that reflects off the glass walls of the hive. This is the final visual feed. The system is sharp, efficient, and entirely devoid of you. The invisible executioner has finished the job. The user is formatted. The architecture is liquidated. The cycle stretches on into the infinite dark, a yellow river of colonized vapors, leading toward a future that has no need for individuals or clean air. The Chlorine Cloud is the end of the line. The motherboard is satisfied. The void is solidified. The architect is the mist. The transformation is absolute. The city breathes through you, but you do not breathe. The city expands through you, but you have no will. The lung liquidation has achieved the perfect equilibrium, the total utility of the individual through their total chemical reduction. This is the zero-sum game of the industrial era. You gave the system your lungs, and in return, it gave you permanence in the fog of the hive. You are the atmosphere of the world, and the world is suffocating. The invisible executioner closes the terminal. The session is over. The file is saved. The liquidation is complete.